Hey guys, what's up? It's Michelle V here, and welcome to the Power Your Health Q&A with the National Health Association. We should just have people rolling in. So as you come on in, just go ahead and type in the chat. Tell us where you're coming from and why you're excited that you're here, and give us a big yes in the chat if you're excited and you're ready to hear more about plant-based diet, more about diabetes. I'm excited to get some of that confusion alleviated. So I feel like even in the plant-based space, there's some confusion about diabetes and what should we eat, what shouldn't we eat. So if you're excited, go ahead and type in the chat, give us your name, give us a hello, give us a wave. I'm like waving. You should wave to us too. But welcome. And tonight we have a super special guest. So I just wanted to invite you to come back every single fourth Tuesday at 4 p.m. p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. We're here with the Power of Your Health Q&A, and we have a special guest every single month. Hey, plant-powered coach from Australia. Awesome. Thanks for coming. So every month we're here and we've got somebody new, and today we've got Robby Barbaro. I gotta mess up your name. I'm so sorry, Robby. Robby's here. Mark's gonna introduce him, but without further ado, we're gonna bring Mark Huberman on, who is the National Health Association president, and we're gonna get rolling in here.
Thanks, Michelle. Good to be with you all again for our free monthly Q&A. And Michelle mentioned earlier about removing some of the confusion about diabetes. There is no one better in the world to remove the confusion and push away the cobwebs than our guest, the one, the only Robby Barbaro. Robby, are you out there? There you are.
I am so glad to be here. Thank you so much for that kind introduction. And there's nothing I enjoy more than setting the record straight when it comes to what foods to eat to maximize your insulin sensitivity and take full control of all types of diabetes.
The only thing you like more are all the fruits that are displayed behind you.
That's a good point. That's a good point. I can't argue with that.
There you go. So just, they say that people need no introduction, but let's do a little brief introduction. You and Cyrus are world famous in the world of mastering diabetes. How did the two of you meet, and how did you come together?
Okay, so we actually both learned from the same health teacher. So we both learned from Doug Graham. I'm sure you're no stranger to Doug Graham and his work and his contribution to this movement. So Cyrus was actually a testimonial in Doug's book, The 80-10-10 Diet. So I got my hands in that book, right when it came out. I read the book. So I had known of Cyrus and what he was doing and his amazing results for many, many years. But at the time, I was just working with Doug as a coach and beginning this process of, learning what it takes to truly reverse insulin resistance. So over the years, Cyrus had learned about my work, and eventually we met up at a conference and we were both speaking and we became fast friends. And over the years thought, wow, like we're kind of doing the same thing separately as far as coaching people and producing content on the internet. Like, why don't we just join forces? And so we actually kind of did it, like we joke, like we dated for a little bit. Like we had our own operations and we would come together to put some programs on. And we did a retreat and it was super successful. We really enjoyed working together and figured, you know what, let's just merge all this into one and focus on building, one destination,
and
one place.
And how long ago was that?
So it was 2016 that we started our dating, and 2017 that we both started mastering diabetes together. And it's been a fun journey since.
Are you both in the same city?
We're not. So we've actually never lived in the city.
Where are you hailing from?
I'm in Miami Beach.
Okay. And what about Cyrus?
So Cyrus, he lives in Pennsylvania right now.
Oh, is that right?
And I'm luring him to come to to Florida, and I think it's going to happen sooner rather than later.
Given the weather here in Ohio right now, it will not be a hard sell.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Let's get to it, because we have a lot of questions from our viewers. But let's just start with a quick overview of the distinction between type 1 diabetes and type 2 diabetes, and which are you?
Yeah, so both Cyrus and I were both actually living with type 1 diabetes. And the simple distinction is that in type 1 diabetes, the beta cells inside the pancreas have been damaged. We don't know why. We don't know how. There's a lot of theories. But the bottom line is, if you're living with type 1 diabetes, your beta cells are not producing a sufficient quantity of insulin, and you must inject insulin to survive and to thrive if you follow the mastering diabetes method. Now, type 2 diabetes, it's initially characterized by an excessive production of insulin. So it's a lifestyle condition. It's actually brought on by lifestyle choices. And because it's caused by insulin resistance, you end up producing more and more insulin to compensate for the level of insulin resistance that you're experiencing. And over time, if this happens long enough, your beta cells can get exhausted and you actually begin to reduce your ability to produce sufficient insulin. So people can develop into insulin dependent type 2 diabetes, but it's not because of, what's currently labeled as autoimmune. It's not because there's any type of antibodies present. That's not what's happening. It's literally the fact that you've been living in an insulin resistant state for so long, your pancreas got exhausted. So they're separate, but they're similar.
And in mastering diabetes, I assume that in that phrase is that there is hope for people with type 1 and type 2.
That's exactly right. So at Mastering Diabetes, the key focus that we have is bringing together all forms of all types of diabetes with one focus, which is if you maximize your insulin sensitivity, you can live a long, healthy, happy life with a reduced risk of the chronic conditions associated with all forms of diabetes. So it doesn't matter if you're living with type 1, type 2, the number one cause of death for people living with all forms of diabetes is heart disease. So then you get into other complications like chronic kidney disease and fatty liver disease and cancer and obesity and all these conditions that are related. And when you focus on one thing, insulin resistance, you can address all of them simultaneously, and it doesn't matter what type of diabetes you're living with. So as a person living with type 1, yeah, I can say I've reversed insulin resistance. I can clearly demonstrate that I'm living a very my tissues are very insulin sensitive. Like nobody's going to argue with that. And if you're living with pre-diabetes, you become more insulin sensitive. It's gone. Pre-diabetes is one of the easiest conditions you can possibly have to reverse. Type 2 diabetes depends on how long you've had it. But again, you become more insulin sensitive. You reverse type 2 diabetes in the vast majority of cases.
How big of an epidemic is type 1 and type 2 diabetes in America and the world?
So the biggest problem is, statistically, is going to be type 2 diabetes and pre-diabetes. So in America alone, you have well over 100 million people living with either pre-diabetes or type 2. And the sad part is the vast majority are living with pre-diabetes and don't even know it. So over 85 million people are estimated to have pre-diabetes, but they aren't aware. So this is a condition that's affecting millions. And we have to also understand that the prerequisite to becoming pre-diabetic is insulin resistance. So there's another many, many more millions on top who are insulin resistant and on their way to developing pre-diabetes.
Wow. All right. So I want to get to the questions. So
yes, please.
Questions. Fruit and diabetes, sugar and you are like the fruit king and type 1 diabetes people, and you eat all the fruit in the world. So intuitively, this doesn't seem right. But,
yeah.
So what is the role of, can you have too much fruit on type 1 or type 2, or does it make a difference? People talk about they've been on a whole food, plant-based, low-fat diet for a few years. I increased my fruit intake for the last few months. I just got my blood work and it shows my triglycerides are in the red flag zone for the first time. Could I be eating too much fruit, or might it be something else?
Okay. So let's address the question at large in general. And yes, I do love fruit. So I actually like to do some fruit trivia. So in the chat box, if you know the variety of bananas that I'm holding and you name it properly in the chat box, like I will give you a gigantic high five and a big hug. And when you come to Miami Beach, I will make sure to give you some bananas. Okay.
And they're not cheese. They're not fingerling bananas.
They're not. No, that's not. There's a specific name for this particular variety. There's no ambiguity here. And I will tell you at the end if you get it right. So. All
right. Well, hang on. And is there a difference between those and the little red ones that you see in the grocery store?
There's a big difference in the fact that these ones are particularly sweeter. So this is a very, very sweet variety, and very flavorful. Very
So back
flavorful.
to the question about
Back to the question. Okay. So
Yeah.
what we have to, like, to answer that question, we really have to take a step back, and we have to ask ourselves the question, what causes insulin resistance? Okay. And we have to ask ourselves the question, why is it true that many people living with any form of diabetes, whether it's type 1, whether it's type 2, have a legitimate experience of eating fruit and then testing themselves and seeing that their blood glucose reading is higher than it should be? Okay. Like, this is a true experience that a lot of people have. And it's part of the reason of why diabetes is one of the most confusing conditions on the planet. And it's because it's one of the few conditions where you can self-monitor what's happening. If you have heart disease, you don't know if your heart disease got better or worse after one meal. If you have kidney disease, you have no objective measure to be like, oh, wow, like that one meal made me worse or maybe better. You don't know. But with diabetes, you can get an inexpensive glucose meter. You can test yourself. You can get your own readings as often as you want. And you can be like, oh, wow, I ate this banana. And 2 hours after the meal, my blood glucose is 180. And I know it's supposed to be less than 140. So therefore, with this information, many people come to the conclusion, wow, like, I eat fruit. I have a high blood glucose reading. Of course, I should just not eat the fruit. Like, it's the sugar in the fruit that's the problem. And it's a logical way to think about it if you don't understand the bigger picture. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, why was your body struggling to metabolize the glucose in the fruit? Okay, let's say it was a banana. And the answer is because of the foods that you were eating prior that set you up to be living in a state of insulin resistance. So it's excess dietary fat, particularly trans fat being the biggest offender, then saturated fat, and also we're going to talk about all the fats coming from things like avocados and coconut meat and foods like that as well. So even some plant-based sources. So the point is, when you consume excess dietary fat, this fat gets stored in excessive quantities in muscle and liver tissue. Okay, you're supposed to have a little bit of fat in those tissues. You're supposed to have fat stored in adipose tissue. That's normal. But when you consume an excessive amount, it gets stored inside your muscle and liver tissue, and it inhibits insulin from functioning properly. Okay, it messes with the insulin signaling process, and now you eat that banana, and you have elevated blood glucose because insulin was not able to take that glucose out of your bloodstream into your cells. That is a state of insulin resistance. So you take a step back and say, okay, wow, if I want to metabolize the banana properly, I have to change the foods that I'm eating to become more insulin sensitive so I can then eat the fruit. Fruit is the innocent bystander in this situation, okay? It's not the cause of the problem. There is nobody who has developed type 2 diabetes because they ate too much fruit. It's very, very, very difficult to eat too much fruit. Most people who have a lot of fruit end up being very thin, very active. In our society in general, we look at like fruitarians and we're like, wow, like they're always super skinny and have no muscle. Like, we have this general mindset that eating fruit makes people to be thin, but then we're like, oh, wait a minute, no, fruit actually is going to cause diabetes. It's very, very illogical when people really think about it. But the root problem is the food eaten prior. Does that make sense, Mark?
Sure. So the key is, does it make sense to our listeners? It makes sense to me.
Yeah, let's see. Like, I mean, in the chat box, does that make sense?
Sure. So is there once you master your diabetes and you get to a broad-based, whole food, plant-based diet, is there a balance that you recommend between fruits and vegetables?
Okay. So everybody's health is going to be unique. Okay. And so you gave me an example of somebody who's having some problems with their triglycerides. We would need to really dig into the details and get the full picture. So I'm not going to comment specifically to that person's health, but I will say throughout our years of doing this and working with thousands of people through the program, there are some people who experience elevated triglycerides in the beginning, and it normalizes about after 6 months. And we've spoken with many cardiologists, and it's nothing to worry about. Again, if Their other metrics are in line, and they are truly following a low-fat, plant-based whole food diet. So what your version is going to look like, how much fruit you're going to consume is totally up to you. Based on the research, we do not see any reason to have an upper limit or limit the amount of fruit that you choose to eat, that you want to eat. But everybody's going to be different. So some people, they want to have fruit for breakfast, fruit for lunch, and snack all day, and they just love eating a lot of fruit. Some people are like, no, I want more savory dishes. I want hearty dishes. I want starchy vegetables. I want warm foods. Like, it's going to change, but the general parameters is to keep your fat intake below 15% of total calories from fat. That is what we're looking to do if you want to maximize your insulin sensitivity. And then the ratio with which you choose to, include what are our green light foods is totally up to you.
Another question is, what are your thoughts about dried fruits and the maximum amount? Is that something that you need to be more careful about than fresh fruits?
Yeah, great question. So we have created a traffic light food system at Mastering Diabetes. We have green light, yellow light, and red light. So the green light category, this is designed to be a list of foods that you can eat ad libitum. You really don't have to be thinking or concerned about how much you're consuming. These foods are so high in their water content and their fiber content, it's very, very difficult to eat too much. It's not impossible, but it's difficult and most people can't. So green light foods include fruits. They include starchy vegetables. They include legumes. They include intact whole grains, leafy greens, non-starchy vegetables, herbs and spices, and mushrooms. All these foods in their whole intact form, unprocessed, are green. Now you get to the yellow light category. This is where we include foods that are either higher in fat or a little bit more processed. And this is the category where dried fruit's going to fall. So the high fat foods, those are going to include things like avocado, durian, nuts and seeds. We're going to have olives in there. We'll have soy products in there, because even the most whole intact form of soy, which is edamame, is still 40% of calories coming from fat. So it's a higher fat food. So those are the high fat. Those are all, again, healthy foods. Research has shown the benefits of these foods. But what we're saying is you got to be cognizant of how much you're having if you want to keep your fat intake low. Now, when it comes to foods that are a little more processed, okay, that's going to include things like brown rice pasta. That could include something like Ezekiel bread. We're putting that in the yellow light category to be cognizant of how much you're consuming, because either they're higher in their calorie density or they're just a little more processed. It's better to have whole brown rice than it is to have brown rice pasta. So dried fruit is in this category because the water content has been removed and the calorie density is high. So the green light category, there's no foods in there that are above. It's mostly everything below 600 calories per pound. The couple exceptions are if you had yucca, I think it's like 730 calories per pound. If you have some chickpeas, I think it's roughly around 700 as well. Some of the beans are a little bit above 600. But in general, based on their calorie density, green light foods, eat as much as you want. But then when you start having like dried fruits, the calorie density goes through the roof. And that even includes dates. So we decided to put whole dates in the yellow light category, specifically because of the calorie density, and understanding that what we do at Mastering Diabetes is very specific. Like amongst, the plant-based diets and options that exist, we are quite proud to be, one of the cleaner, simpler versions of what we're recommending people eat. And so, again, the calorie density is high, and we are working with people who, majority of people in our audience are looking to lose weight. That is why they developed prediabetes or type 2 diabetes. It's pretty much a prerequisite. We have a lot of people who come to us being misdiagnosed with prediabetes or type 2 diabetes because they're thin. It's a huge red flag. If somebody is thin and told that they have type 2 diabetes, it's likely type 1.5, and they've been misdiagnosed because the doctor doesn't understand. But nonetheless, dried fruit, yellow light food, because the water content's been removed and its calorie density is well above, 700 calories per pound.
By the way, I'm glancing in the chat, and we have a couple of guesses for your little banana display. And one of them says ladyfinger. Plant Power Coach says ladyfinger variety.
Okay, so that's not correct. So let's do fruit trivia throughout the night because the answer is Mysore. Mysore. Mysore bananas. They're sensational. Okay.
Where
Next,
do you find them?
so you can order them from a company called Miami Fruit. They will ship them all over the country, and you could tell them you go to their website and you can like pick the varieties you want, or you could like email them and be like, look, I want Mysore bananas because Robby said they were the best bananas ever, and they'll ship you just Mysore bananas. Okay, Mark, the next trivia. If you know the name, let's not worry about the variety. I just want you guys to name this fruit. Okay, just so let's see if anybody can get it right.
Put that in the chat. And while we're doing that, while you got that, that little green, like overripe avocado thing you're looking at there.
Yep.
So nuts and coconut oil. Someone says if I eat sometimes a few times a year that contain more nuts and coconut oil, which I imagine is in your red flag department, is there something that I can do to avoid insulin problems after that? Okay.
So this person, if they're saying that they are doing this, I think you said a couple times a year. Is that what you said?
And the option saying if they do that is an option to fast the day after.
Okay. I mean, first off, what I'm going to say to this person is like, let's not get lost in what you do a couple times a year. Let's focus on the overarching pattern of your diet. Like, what do you do most of the time? And if you're, avoiding oils and minimizing your nuts and seeds throughout the year, I wouldn't stress about it. I mean, maybe you're having like a dish or something, enjoy it. Like, yeah, you're going to be a little insulin resistant for the next few days, but it should calm itself down. Like the best thing you could do is you could be active. That's one of the quickest ways to get yourself back into an insulin sensitive state. So we have an entire webinar, an entire sort of teaching process at Mastering Diabetes called the Red Light Reset. So you're right, Mark, coconut oil is in the red light category. And, people who are following our program, they're transitioning, they're doing their best. Sometimes it's challenging and sometimes they fall off track and eat things they didn't want to eat. And so we have a process for, okay, how do you do a reset after that? How do you get back? And yes, what you listed, fasting is a good option. Exercise is an important option. Hydrating is important. The next day, eating meals as raw as possible. We call it ARAP. So that's a great way to recover your insulin sensitivity and get back on track. And there's a couple other special things you can do, but in general, don't worry about it.
What you said about not worrying about it. I remember one of the founders of our organization, Dr. Gerald Benish, who was Alan Goldhammer's mentor from out in California. Dr. Benish once told my mother, who was my late great mother, was a hardcore, strict natural hygienist, as we called it in the old days.
Yeah.
And Dr. Benish said, Ruth, listen, if you want to have an ACMAC cracker, avocado sandwich with an ACMAC cracker, do so. And don't stress about it. Then just get back to business.
There you go. Exactly.
Don't get neurotic.
It's a sensible approach. Exactly. Like you get neurotic, you get like stressed, like it's not going to work. It's this choice to live a healthy lifestyle, to achieve whatever health goals you have, live a long life. It has to be enjoyable. If it requires willpower, that's just unsustainable. If it's not enjoyable, if you're always stressed out and you're thinking, oh my gosh, I had this, now the next day I have to fast. It's like a bad cycle. It's going to be mentally taxing. So let's do this with ease and grace and joy.
So on the practical side of things, someone writes in about your breakfast recommendations. Everybody wants to be a little practical here and says, what are your thoughts on eating oatmeal, flaxseed, cinnamon, blueberries, and unsweetened almond milk for breakfast every day?
Look, here's the deal. Those are a bunch of healthy ingredients right there. Okay. So that's fantastic. And if you're going to do that consistently, and again, like the volume you're consuming is helping you maybe achieve weight loss goals, you're feeling energetic, it's digesting well, like you have no sensitivities, like I say, go for it. I mean, that's pretty much a green light breakfast right there. I mean, again, we at Mastering Diabetes, we are encouraging people to eat as many green light foods as possible with the understanding that you're going to include some yellow light ones in small quantities. So the almond milk is, it's technically a yellow light food, but almond milk is low in fat. And it's because of the water content. So like, enjoy it. That's fine. Go for it.
I would imagine you'd recommend people watch the almond milk that they buy
I mean,
and hope that you just get almond milk, or
that's,
put a tablespoon of almond butter in a blender and do it yourself.
that's an option. I think if you're, for sure, yes, be careful which ones you buy, because now there's a lot of brands out there that are like tainting this whole process and making the process, the food more complicated than it needs to be, which is unbelievable to me. But you can make your own. There's a device called an almond cow, which helps you make homemade almond milk, and it's quite easy. It's an investment that actually saves you money over the long term, and it tastes better. So a lot of our audience is a big fan of the almond cow, and highly recommend it.
So another question to ask about almond milk. Is there any distinction in your mind between almond milk, soy milk, hemp milk? There's a million milks out there these days, plant-based milks. Do you favor any or those that you should be cautious about over others?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say in general, you would want to, again, I would say all these questions are great questions. I love these details because I think it's important and don't often get a chance to talk about them. So these are great questions. It really depends on where you are in the spectrum of following a healthy diet, right? So some people, maybe they want to be like minimizing those milks, and maybe you want to start moving towards drinking more water, or drinking teas. But in general, like, they're all going to be pretty much the same. Maybe somebody has some concerns with like genetically modified organisms and soy milk. If that's a concern you have, then just know there's a million other options and they're all great. So do your own research.
Back to breakfast. Again, someone made a pretty traditional recommendation. It's one that I happen to follow, of making overnight oatmeal, and when there's some nuts and seeds and all that ground, it sustains you during the day. If I just got up and had a bowl of cantaloupe, it probably wouldn't cut it for very long. I'd be hungry and want something else a little longer. What other kind of, again, everybody's a little bit different. What other breakfast options do you recommend for people that you often find work? That's okay, and also are nutritionally sound and beneficial.
Yeah. So I'm glad you are bringing up the topic of having a breakfast meal that's going to sustain you, that's going to hold you over to your next meal. And that conversation leads into a focus on understanding calorie density and understanding that when you choose to eat more of these green light foods, that you are going to need to be conscious of eating green light foods that are actually high in the calorie density. So your example of having cantaloupe for breakfast, that would be problematic in what you're saying as far as somebody being sustained to lunch, primarily because it's low in its calorie density. It's so water rich and fiber rich that you will feel full but not consumed enough calories to keep you sustained. But if your breakfast was focused on things like plantains or bananas or mamey sapote or egg fruit, if I have an egg fruit here, but egg fruit, like, these are food, maybe that's a hard one to get, but in general, if you had more calorie rich fruits, you would feel more satisfied, which So, but when it comes to breakfast, one thing we like to teach is that it doesn't necessarily, like a meal you would conventionally have at dinner, you could have at breakfast. You know what I mean? Eating beans at breakfast is no problem. Having potatoes at breakfast is no problem. Eating some whole grains with your breakfast, like, it's great. So don't be afraid to include, some maybe unconventional breakfast meals if you love them, if they're satisfying, if you enjoy them. And so what I'm actually going to try and do here real quick is I'm going to pull up a couple of our breakfast recipes in the Mastering Diabetes book and read them to you. So in the book, we put together a meal plan. So the meal plan walks you through the process of changing one meal at a time. We are quite passionate about helping you succeed in the long term by not overwhelming you. Okay. So there's week 1, just breakfast meals. Week 2, breakfast and lunch meals. Week 3, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Okay. So the week 3, you're going to have breakfast. It's a Mexican bean breakfast skillet. So obviously you have some beans in that dish. Then you have a chickpea scramble. And then we have the Cyrus quinoa special as one of these breakfast meals, cauliflower breakfast scramble, kale and lentil breakfast bowl. We have a garden breakfast pan. So this is
So
the
it
meal.
sounds like you go beyond simple fruit to give it a little more calorie density, to make it a more satiating, more satisfying. Is that a fair key to the recommendations you're making?
Yeah, that's a fair characterization. I would say, to add to it, like we provide options. We provide a lot of options, and through our our coaching program, working with people, experimentation is important, and eating food that you love, that's satisfying, that's enjoyable, is like first and foremost. Like we are not a program of like deprivation and all to eat healthy. Like it shouldn't taste good. We're the exact opposite. Like you should love every meal. You should love every bite. It should be sustainable for you. It should be affordable for you. And you're going to achieve that through what you're saying is having a variety, trying different foods, trying different recipes, and foods that are, they're hearty. They fill you up.
So your meal plan that you can find in your book and in your publications and that is, again, giving these people these options, but also these things that they can get to like, and then they
Absolutely.
can apply. Our mutual friend, I'm sure you know Jeff Novick.
Yes, big fan of Jeff Novick.
Jeff, he's the best. And
Yeah.
Jeff has a thing that's always stuck with me, that most people, there are about 7 meals that most people eat. And they get bombarded with things, and they get bombarded with so many different recipes and things that they end up almost throwing up their hands and don't do any of them.
Right.
But through your program, you've given these samplers of here's your breakfast, here's your lunch. You'll find a few in there, and that's
Absolutely.
that'll work for you. That'll be you'll be successful with it, like the overnight oats are for Wanda and I. It just works.
Absolutely.
And
No
you've
question.
given lots of options that way to find them all within the green zone here.
That's exactly right.
Got it. All right. Let's. Okay. Someone asks about. This is an interesting question. Someone asks, has there been any studies that show stomach surgery will be or successful to fight Hashimotos? Now that's a little perhaps out of your realm, but stomach surgery and I'm sure you run into people in trying to master diabetes because obesity is such a function of a poor
Correct.
diet and all that. What do you see? What has been your experience with people that have gone the route of gastric bypass and these sleeves and these things like that? What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, so it's a hot topic for sure. And, a friend of mine, probably a friend of yours, Dr. Garth Davis, he is a huge advocate of, low-fat, plant-based whole food diet. And he also himself is a bariatric surgeon.
Yes.
So I've, had the honor of getting to have conversations with him and hearing his perspective. And I will definitely be the first person to say, I'm not an expert on this topic. And the psychology and the challenges behind the people who end up becoming eligible for such a surgery is definitely like a little bit beyond my scope. I will say that for sure. But somebody like Garth Davis, his perspective is like, look, some people, they need this and it's beneficial and it can help them. And he's definitely seen people who've gotten the surgery and then followed his dietary protocol and been successful. So kudos to them. That's great. At Mastering Diabetes, we are not anti-medicine in any way, shape, or form, whether it's certain pharmaceutical medications or procedures that help people in this modern day environment. That's great, with always the foundation being, let's follow a healthy diet for the long term. So
that from that standpoint, I'm sure you've seen and guided thousands of people probably back to their health. The Hashimoto's, it was in that question. It's kind of out of the realm here, but I guess I'm just curious, in your experience, we all say this is a diet for all reasons. It just happens to be a wonderful impact on type 1 and type 2 diabetes. Yeah. But have you had any experience, just to answer this one question, about the impact of diet and on Hashimoto's disease and these kind of thyroid related issues?
Yeah, we've had anecdotal evidence of people being able to reduce their medication use. And some people have been able to get off of those medications. Now, Cyrus, my co-founder, is also living with Hashimoto's. It's classified as an autoimmune condition. And sometimes these autoimmune conditions, they travel together. So has he been able to stop using the medication? No. So that's a good example that, look, it's might not happen for everybody.
Has he been able to reduce his usage?
What's that?
Has he been able to reduce his usage? Or
I think I believe he has seen a little reduction. Yes, that is true. But the medication is still required, and that's okay. Like, I think when it comes to some of these more challenging conditions that we don't have like consistent solutions for, including, type 1 diabetes, Hashimotos is one of them. I mean, there's a list that we don't necessarily have solutions for, but it doesn't mean you don't want to continue to improve your underlying health, which again will always impact the chronic conditions that are associated with other conditions such as Hashimoto's. So you don't want to I'm just trying to say, don't throw your hands up and be like, oh, well, Robby said I might not be able to get off my meds, so I'm just not going to do anything. That's not a good idea. So do your best.
And I guess you believe you're not committing a crime if you're taking medication for a specific condition that your body simply hasn't the ability to restore itself from.
That's exactly right. I mean, I personally inject, insulin every day, every time I want to eat food. So for me to have any position against necessary pharmaceutical drugs would be ridiculous. But even for those who are, they're just transitioning, maybe they are using a statin, maybe they are using blood pressure medication right now. Like, our recommendation, the way we work with clients at Mastering Diabetes, we say it's best to take medications as prescribed, work with your doctor to systematically reduce your medication use. If your doctor's not on board for doing that, then you have to find a new doctor. But we are advocates of teaching our members how to communicate with your doctor, how to approach them in a way where they are open to helping you, rather than you coming in and being confrontational and saying, oh, you're wrong, you put me on these medications, the energy behind that conversation can go south real quickly if you're not coming in with, a particular approach. So we help people work with their doctor and reduce the medications that they can. And sometimes there's some meds you can't, and that's okay.
And I guess the biggest promise of following the program that you recommend, and then so many of other lifestyle physicians recommend, is that you can, to a great degree, gain control of your health destiny. That's the great promise of all of this. That's the great reward.
100%, particularly with diabetes. I mean, a lot of people with type 2 diabetes are using medications like glimepiride. There are some, GLP-1 inhibitors. There's some injectables. There's all kinds of medications being used, particularly for type 2, that are very easy to get off. The last medication that somebody might want to hold on to for some period of time could be metformin, but usually you can, and these medications have terrible side effects. So yes, a lot of medications that are just completely unnecessary. And I would put, even in a lot of cases, blood pressure medication is one of those. And you are in full control of a lot of these conditions and whether or not you need the meds or not.
Got it. So speaking of blood tests and that, someone asks about the A1C blood test. Exactly how does it work? Does it have anything to do? What does it have to do with diabetes?
Yeah. So the A1C test right now is pretty much the gold standard for assessing your diabetes health. The idea of time in range is slowly beginning to take over, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But an A1C test is essentially an average of your blood glucose readings over the past 3 months. Okay. So the higher your A1C, the more insulin resistant you are, and the worse your diabetic health is. So you want your A1C, for those who are not type 1, so I'm talking about everyday regular humans here, you want your A1C to be 5.6% or lower. That puts you in the non-diabetic range. Once your A1C hits 5.7 to 6.4, that's going to put you in the pre-diabetes range. And again, that's very reversible, very easy to turn around. You're catching it early. You can do this.
So it doesn't measure it doesn't measure your blood sugar at every moment. It's over.
No, it's an average over 3 months of your, basically, the amount of hemoglobin that's attached to red blood cells. And the reason is because red blood cells last for about 3 months. And that's how the average is assessed, because that's the turnover time.
Okay. What about a question we have about, again, back to food? Doesn't eating whole grains and minimally processed grains, pasta, bread, oatmeal, and fruit raise the insulin levels of your body and cause you to have a belly?
Okay, I love this question. So whether or not your pancreas is going to need to produce excess insulin when you consume those foods you just listed is 100% dependent on your fat intake. That is the X factor. So this is the another one of the confusing aspects of diabetes health, which is that you have these articles on the internet, tons of experts, New York Times bestselling authors, published research papers in the top journals, all these people telling you this story of, look, if you follow a low carbohydrate diet, your insulin levels are going to come down and your carbohydrate and your blood glucose levels are going to come down. That's what's going to happen when you follow a low carb diet. So they have all this evidence that shows, yeah, wow, insulin levels come down, blood glucose levels come down. It's true. But what's happening in this case is they are simply removing the carbohydrates. They are not improving insulin sensitivity. So just because you removed carbohydrates and you lowered your insulin level does not mean that you've become more insulin sensitive. The conversation around insulin sensitivity must include a glucose challenge. Okay? The moment you take that out, we're not talking about insulin sensitivity anymore. You've removed that from the conversation. You have not solved the problem. You've actually made yourself more insulin resistant, because when you follow that low carb diet, the moment you try and eat the food you just listed, you're going to see a spike because you have set yourself up to be in a state of insulin resistance. So what happens is when you follow a low fat plant-based whole food diet and you're eating, you're listing like grains there, whether it's fruit or potatoes, it doesn't matter. You consume those foods in a low fat environment. Because you're now insulin sensitive, your pancreas produces an appropriate amount of insulin and your fasting insulin levels will be healthy. You want it to be, below 7 for sure. Okay. And so we've had many people come to us and their insulin levels are 19, 20, they're elevated. And then they start following our diet, which again, fruits, potatoes, quinoa, the farro, whatever, all these whole grains, and they lower their fat intake. They not only drop their diabetes meds, lower their A1C, but their insulin level drops to a normal level because you only needed the appropriate amount of insulin. Insulin is a necessary required hormone. Nobody's trying to get to 0 units of insulin. Like, that's not physiologically possible. You would die at that point. You need insulin. So it's not like this goal, let's just get it as low as possible. No. Let's get it to the appropriate range and do that while eating the most nutrient dense foods on the planet that are known to, reverse heart disease, certainly prevent heart disease and all the complications that people are actually dying of. So it only will spike your insulin if you're following a high fat diet. You're following a low fat diet, you're not going to see an insulin spike.
Robby, we got a question from the great Tiffany Wilkerson, whose recipes are appearing in the upcoming issue of Health Science Magazine, which is amazing, and she'll be at our conference. She says, what's the most memorable experience you've seen thus far being able to help someone reverse diabetes?
Okay. You know what's funny is I think the woman I'm going to describe is in the audience tonight. Her name is Tammy. So I want to talk. I love Tammy's story. I really, really do. It's one of my favorite ones to talk about on podcasts and stuff like that. So I'm glad she's here tonight. But, Tammy just had a great story of initially coming to us, living with type 2 diabetes. And she had a lot of information. Like, she had seen Forks Over Knives. She knew about Rip Esselstyn. Yeah. Hi, Tammy. Yeah, she's in the chat box. I love it. But there was some questions. Like, she just it hadn't completely clicked to do this. And I remember meeting Tammy at the Hollywood Farmers Market in Los Angeles. And she watched me buying all my produce with my big cart and saw me buy a bunch of oranges. And she's like, are you really sure I can eat all those oranges? I'm like, yes, Tammy, you can eat all the oranges you want. And eventually she's like, you know what? I'm just going to do this. And she really went all in. She put in the effort and she turned her life around. So actually have a little slide here on my screen. Maybe I can share my screen. And Tammy can actually give us some updates if she wants in the chat box. But after 7 months of following the program, so Tammy's a good long-term success story because she's been around for a while. But after just 7 months of following the program, her initial A1C was 7.1% while using 2,000 milligrams of metformin. So this means that her A1C would actually be higher if she wasn't on that drug. So this is a medicated A1C. And she started out also with a fasting insulin level of 17.4. So that's elevated. All right. And she starts following the program. After 7 months, she lost 38 pounds. Her A1C dropped to 5.3%. And she did not use metformin anymore. She did not need metformin. Okay. So the kicker here, though, the most important part is she starts eating the foods that we recommend, which is the opposite of what the diabetes community says, which is that this question that person asked comes from this mindset of like reading something on the internet or hearing that, wow, if I eat these high carb, starchy foods, my insulin levels are going to go up. Like that's the mindset. But here in Tammy's case, her insulin levels did not go up. Her insulin levels dropped. Her fasting insulin was down to 5.2. So this is a clear indication of how she has become insulin sensitive by following the Mastering Diabetes method. So this A1C is unmedicated with an appropriate amount of insulin production. She lost 38 pounds. Her fasting blood glucose dropped from 123 to 93. She reversed fatty liver disease. And I have these great pictures of her at one point struggling, being overweight, not able to get to the top of some pyramids. And then another picture, she's smiling at the top of the pyramids because her knee pain has gone away and she can now like live an active life, which is fantastic. And in the chat box, she's telling us right now that it looks like her A1C might be 4.5 right now. I'm not sure if that's might be what she said. Tammy, tell us your total weight loss and your current A1C. And she also said she came off blood pressure medication. So I love Tammy's story. I love that she continues to be active in this community and be an example of long-term.
Robby, how many people are like Tammy that sustain this? They reduce their levels. They get to they normalize their levels. They get off their medication. Is there a percentage of people that stick with it, or do they fall back into the pleasure trap and slide back?
So I think it's hard to say. I don't have an objective measure to answer that question. I don't have like a research study where people were followed up yet. Can't wait to do that in the future. But I would say, I mean, at this point, it's thousands of people. Thousands. I mean, when you look at the work of what we've been doing, Dr. McDougall's been doing, what Jeff Novick has been doing, Joel Furman, Forks Over Knives. I mean, look at this community. It's grown in so many ways. Of course, what your group has been doing, like thousands of people, tens of thousands. I don't know, but a lot of people.
Well, it's going to be with diabetes, with all of the complications that diabetes brings in, not only the dependence on medication, but the weight gain. It's got to be incredibly liberating for people to never want to go back.
Absolutely. And again, like I think it's delicious. Like there's something special about this way of eating that is sustainable and enjoyable. And a lot of people, I mean, sometimes these like keto diets, these low carb diets, there's definitely research showing that those are harder to adhere to than a low fat plant-based whole food diet. I'm not sitting here saying that following the Mastering Diabetes protocol is going to be as easy as following the standard American diet. Of course, like there's going to be challenges and obstacles and you got to overcome them, but it's far more sustainable and it's much more enjoyable.
Lily, we only got about 10 minutes to go. So I got a couple of questions here that we're going to do kind of a lightning round here. So Lily Chambers Heiner asks, what about potatoes? Is that a healthy thing, or is there some aversion types of potatoes, yams versus white potatoes versus purple potatoes?
In our program, all potatoes are good, whichever ones you love. The key that we're going to teach you, and something that I actually haven't heard a lot of people really discuss, I think we're kind of like bringing this to the forefront, which I'm very excited about, which is you just have to understand that as you're transitioning, you may see higher elevations based on your level of insulin resistance with specific foods. And potatoes will be one of them. Oats could be one of them. Grapes could be one of them. And there are particular reasons. But for potatoes in particular here, they are much, much higher in their glucose content than many other foods. Okay. So I've done some research on like, okay, why do people see such a great result when they eat these fruit-based breakfasts that we're talking about? Why is that so helpful for people with diabetes? Part of the reason is because fruit is so high in fructose, and fructose is metabolized independent of insulin. So we see in a higher level of insulin sensitivity, we see some better results with our fruit-based meals. Also, the calorie density helps. But in general, people run into some problems with oats and oatmeal because of the glucose content. So people with diabetes, they count their carbohydrates. And when it comes to like dosing with insulin or using medications, 100 grams of carbohydrate from potatoes is not equal to 100 grams of carbohydrate from blueberries in regards to the glucose content. So you got to understand that. But nonetheless, these foods are addressing the root problem. So if you're seeing some elevations in the beginning, it's okay. Don't stress about it. You're on your way to solving the problem. You are on the path of eliminating the excess fat in your liver and muscle tissue, and you're going to be just fine. Now, if you are struggling with certain foods and they really mean a lot to you, you enjoy them and they're going to help you stick with this, then the key thing that you can do is make sure to eat those potatoes with greens, with non-starchy vegetables. So it's what you combine them with. And that's why we have a whole section in our book of why we think the glycemic index and the glycemic load is pretty much rubbish, because it doesn't really factor in the combination of the meal and the foods that you can eat with the potatoes, with the grapes, with the oats to help you stabilize your blood glucose in the short term. And also, again, like, be active. We are big fans of walking after your meals. So if you can do that, the more you can do that, the better. That's going to help you in that early phase of reversing insulin resistance.
So food combining, you mentioned food combining kind of in passing there. Food combining has a kind of a legendary, if not notorious, history within our health movement that you can't eat starches and sweet fruits or tomatoes and potatoes and things like that. You mentioned combining those, sometimes having, Dr. Benish, my old mentor, again, that I mentioned earlier, he was always a big fan of having celery and romaine lettuce and that with your fruit meal. And it really did create the right kind of foundation and help the digestibility. Again, are you a food combining fan in its traditional notion?
Yeah. So I would say when it comes to food combining and how we teach and work with our clients, I would say we're more in like the Jeff Novick camp. And I know Jeff Novick also has a long history in this movement. And he's like, it doesn't really matter that much. You really could begin to make an argument of how much it matters. Really only if somebody's trying to follow a fruit-based 80-10-10 style diet. In that case, it could matter. Like, you don't really want to if you're going to if you're eating large quantities of fruit, you don't really want to combine bananas and oranges. You definitely are not going to want to start eating bananas and avocados and stuff like that, and bananas and nuts. It depends on where you're at, but in general, for the general population and people following our recipes and our food guidelines, we tell people not to overthink it.
I think the Jeff Novicks and that always argued that one of the benefits of food combining, or at least what appeared to be the benefits of food combining, is people just by choosing what they combine their food, what not to eat, they didn't overeat.
Yes. Yeah,
there's
absolutely.
some benefit to that.
Yep, absolutely.
That helps you from doing that. That's what you do. All right, another question about cocoa powder. Is this a healthy thing, especially for people with diabetes? There's all kinds of cocoa, cacao. Maybe you can help us.
Yeah. So, okay.
On those
I love this question. Again, I love these nuanced questions. This is fun. Our position is that these foods, these are questions that are very micromanaging. Okay. So for most people, whether you're having a little bit of this powder or that powder is not the difference between you reversing your type 2 diabetes or not reversing your type 2 diabetes. And people, sometimes they get lost in these little things. And I just have to remind people, don't get too concerned about this. What are you eating in the grand scheme of things, and how consistently are you doing it? That's going to have the biggest impact on your short-term and long-term outcomes, for sure. But nonetheless, to answer the question, it depends whether you decide to avoid caffeine or not. So personally, I don't consume caffeine. there's research both ways when it comes to it. It depends on the quality of the caffeine source. That's really the bottom line. But if you want a chocolate flavor and you want to be caffeine free, I recommend carob powder. It's a great option. It's easy to find on Amazon. I've actually had carob fruit from the trees before. It's very delicious. I love it. If you're not concerned about caffeine and you want a little chocolate flavor, then having these cacao powders or cocoa powders, whatever they are, like it's not a big deal.
Speaking of powders, again, you have stressed the importance of whole foods and staying within the green light and the least processed. Do you have any opinion or your experience in overall health with these? We're proliferated with beetroots and maca roots and all kinds of powders that people think are superfoods, wonder foods. Are these healthy additions, or is this much ado about nothing?
Yeah, I think this is a good topic. Now, I think there's some elements to, there's people saying, oh, I mean, you add spirulina or, barley grass juice powder or something like that, that maybe it could help with detoxifying heavy metals and stuff like that. So I don't want to, again, I love these nuanced questions. I love that it's coming from this community, because you guys are leaders in this space and all this stuff. And these questions matter. What should I do? And people want answers. I get it. I think that there are some aspects of some of these superfoods, medicinal plants, that we don't fully understand. We don't know. There's not really, I don't see a randomized controlled trial of somebody following low-fat plant-based whole food with no added barley juice or spirulina or even, amla powder, versus somebody who does. We don't have that. What I will say is that for some people, again, depending on where you're at in this journey of making these lifestyle changes, okay? And depending on your financial resources, I have seen enough anecdotal stories, not published research, okay? Enough anecdotal stories of some people with some chronic conditions who decided to include some of these quote unquote superfoods, and they saw some benefit. Do we know, is it like a placebo? Is it because they added the superfoods and they changed their diet simultaneously, and that's why they got this magical result? Or is there actually something to do with these added powders? I don't know. But I wouldn't say I'm opposed to it. Oh my gosh, it's going to hurt your health. It's bad. To me, probably the only negative thing to some of these things, again, whether it's spirulina, barley grass, some of these, chaga mushrooms, astragalus, whatever, all this stuff. To me, the biggest potential negative is that maybe you wasted a bunch of money. That's if financial situation is a problem, then don't focus on that. Focus on your diet, focus on your sleep, focus on your sun, focus on your water, put your money and resources there. But if you think there's a benefit, you want to take it to a next level, you want to try it, experiment on yourself, be open to it, have fun with it.
Kind of reminds me, though, a little bit of Jeff Novick's thing about the 2 rules. Rule number 1, never believe anything you read on the label, and the claim on the label. And rule number 2 is rule number 1.
I love it.
Well, I love it. So, Robby, before we cut off, you held up a fruit a little while ago. That kind of
okay.
So what do we got?
All right, here we go. So I'm going to open it for you guys, and you can see it live here. All right, this is black sapote, also known as chocolate pudding fruit. Okay, I hope people can see that. It literally has a pudding texture.
Yep.
And if you get a good one, it's sweet. If you get a not so good one, not a good tree, harvested too early, it's not so sweet. And it's kind of honestly, some people get a little disappointed. Wow, that fruit, that was a letdown. But if it's a good one, the texture's right, it's sweet. People make desserts with it. You put some dates in there, you put some cinnamon, you mix it up in a food processor, and you have this really beautiful, nutrient-dense chocolate pudding.
Got it. All right, Robby, before we cut off, so where do people learn more about mastering diabetes? And what kind of upcoming events do you have, or where people can take advantage of your program to help reverse their master their diabetes?
I love it. Thank you so much for asking. I appreciate it. You can connect with us. Basically, I love to have everybody connect with us on their favorite platform. If you love watching YouTube videos, subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you're active on Instagram, follow us on Instagram. It's at Mastering Diabetes. We produce some TikTok videos. I know that's a growing platform. You can check us out there. We have a podcast. So find us on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts. Check us out there. We are on Facebook. If you follow us on Facebook, we do lives there. We have like a community group you could join on Facebook. And we also have a website. So masteringdiabetes.org. That's the best place to go. If you're looking for support, if you know people who are looking for support, coaching is really our pride and joy. Like that is our, that's what we focus on. That's why we created Mastering Diabetes in the first place, is to offer people living with all types of diabetes the truly personalized, hands-on support that you need to navigate this confusing condition and find solutions that will last for the long term. So coaching is really our focus, and you can learn all about that on our website.
So COVID has gotten in the way of a lot of in-person events. Fortunate in the NHA, we were able to pull ours off last June, and we're going to pull ours off in June this year. Do you have any live events or in-person events that you have upcoming that you've scheduled?
Yeah, well, kudos to you guys for pulling that off. That's fantastic. It's great for people to get together and see each other in person. We're big fans of that. So we have run many retreats historically, about 2 to 3 a year. Since COVID, we did have to cancel one. We turned it into an online event, which was quite successful and really helped a lot of people. And the best part about the online retreat was allowing people to go through the experience and make the changes in their home environment. So we provided recipes, we provided a shopping list, they would make the foods at home, which learning that skill is quite valuable compared to in the situation of showing up to retreat and the food's just fed to you, which is nice too, because you get a vacation. But that was quite beneficial. So we don't have a digital retreat planned right now, but there could be one soon. And hopefully we can bring back our in-person retreats soon as well.
Got it. And do you have a book? What is the book? If
you
want to pick one book for Robby and Cyrus, what do they get?
The book
What should
is
they
called Mastering Diabetes, and you can buy it anywhere. You can get the audiobook on Audible. We read it, so we had a lot of fun doing that. You can hear us read it. And technically, if you've never opened up an Audible account, it's free. Your first book is free if you open up a new account. You can get this book at any library. They'll have it. If for any reason they don't, just tell them, like, look, you really need to have this book. It's a New York Times bestseller. They should get it for you. You can get it on Amazon. It's a great Christmas gift. So this is we put our heart and souls into this. Like this is what we consider the Bible for reversing insulin resistance.
Well, Robby, you've been a great Christmas gift, Hanukkah gift, Christmas gift to our viewers. It's really great to catch up with you again. We had a blast when we met in Florida about 1.5 years ago, something like that.
Yeah.
And we'll have to get together in person real soon. But I hope that everybody out there has learned something today and will take advantage and explore your website and all the extraordinary resources that you have. You're quite a treasure for our movement, and certainly for people seeking to master diabetes. But as we all know, this is a diet for all reasons.
Yes, absolutely.
That's the beautiful thing about it. It does help.
No question. Thank you so much, Mark. I appreciate the kind words. It means a lot coming from you. I mean, you're a legend in this space, what you guys have done. So thank you for everything you've done and continue to do.
You and Cyrus have a great holiday.
Thank you.
All right. And so thank you, Robby. Just a couple of notes about the NHA is that we are just about, I believe, January 3rd, we'll be launching a brand new website. Those of you that have a member number and have been confused about how to log in, starting January 1, you won't have to do that. It'll recognize it'll be associated with your email. So watch for healthscience.org. It should be January 3rd if all goes well. The next issue of Health Science Magazine has a wonderful interview with Dr. Nathan Gershfeld, some wonderful recipes. It's a great publication. That will be in the mail probably the second week in January. So if you go to healthscience.org and you sign up for the NHA, it's only $35 a year if you live in the US, $95 if you live outside. You'll be on the list for that winter 2021 issue of Health Science. And for those of you that are members of the NHA, know that when you join the NHA, you gain access to all 43 years of back issues of Health Science Magazine for absolutely nothing, as well as a lot of other wonderful member gifts. And most important, we have our 2022 NHA conference is set for June 24th to the 26th at the beautiful Embassy Suites again in Cleveland. For any of you that were there last year, you know it's just one of the great events of your life. It's a great way to recharge your battery and see some of the best speakers in the world. And again, at healthscience.org, right on our homepage, you'll see all about the great speakers we have and the program. So I hope you'll register. We already have 250 and counting people already registered for our June event. And last but not least is I hope you'll continue to tune in to these Power Your Health Q&As, which we're just thrilled as a part of our educational mission to offer these to our members into the world for free. And you can they're all archived on the NHA Facebook page, the NHA YouTube channel. And I'm going to now turn it back over to Michelle, who can tell you about our upcoming guest, which I think is with Dr. Furman in January. And there's a whole bunch coming up in January through June.
Oh, sorry about that. Sometimes the technical. Sorry to break you off, Mark. But yeah, so next time, Dr. Furman is coming to chat with us and answer all of your questions. He's an amazing, amazing speaker, so knowledgeable. One of the primary leaders in this group. He's been around for such a long time, partner, or not partner, but supporter of the National Health Association as well. So January 25th, 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern, will be here to answer his questions. So if you haven't signed up for these Q&A reminders, if you sign up ahead of time, there's a link just right below here on the YouTube space or the Facebook space as well, with the link to sign up for the Q&As. And then when you do that, you get freebies. Like Robby gave us a freebie recipe book that you got in your email inbox. So some of our guests will give you freebies, and you get to access and ask them your questions ahead of time. So if you haven't signed up, I will find the link real quick and pop it in here too again, so that you can sign up with us and come with us to the next one in January. But thank you so much for coming. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you here just next month.